Monster Hunter is one of my favourite franchises of all time. Now, before I get into the actual content, what exactly is Monster Hunter? Well, as the name suggests, it's a game series primarily about hunting monsters. And what you do with those monsters is to get the parts to make weapons and armour, as well as charms or talismans, depending on the game you're in. If it was Monster Hunter World, you create talismans. If it's the older titles and Rise, you create charms. But that's a whole nother system in and of itself, because within the Monster Hunter series, it has really changed. Like, if you go from the older titles to World, it is a significant change. One of the main changes is primarily how armor skills works, and it's in the older titles it was more about getting a certain amount of points to activate a skill, whilst in World you don't have to worry about that, it just activates the skill. But in World there's more levels to it, more levels to skills. So like in World there's 7 attack levels, but in the older titles I believe there was a max of 3 levels, and I think it was 10 points for S, 15 points for M, and 20 points for L. I'm not sure, I don't really want to look it up, but I'm sure I'll be corrected in the comments below. And so that's essentially what Monster Hunter is about. And what got me thinking is that it's sort of similar to Dark Souls in a way, and sort of that's how I got into the games. Now when I say it's similar to Dark Souls, is it has a similar challenge to it. It is challenging, maybe not as bad as some of the Dark Souls encounters, although from personal experience I do think the Monster Hunter series is actually harder in some sense. Like, so for instance, when I was playing Generations Ultimate, I really got stuck on Valstrex, whilst in Dark Souls, when I fought the end boss in the Ring City, Slave Knight Gale, I didn't spend accumulatively a day on it, which is how much I spent on Valstrex, whichever one you want to call it. So yeah, that's essentially what Monster Hunter is, and just a bit of a comparison to Dark Souls. I felt like the comparison was necessary, in my opinion, because it's sort of how I got into the Monster Hunter game. But of course there's more to it, which I'll be talking about in a moment. So how did I get into Monster Hunter? Well, it depends how you want to see it. If it's 6 years ago, then I got into Try. If it's a year ago, then I properly got into the series with the advent of me buying World. I think it was a year ago, or no, I think it was back in 2018. Oh wait, no, I got it back in 2020. Yes, I bought Monster Hunter World in 2020, and I loved that. But in my experience with the older title, specifically Try, I did not like that. It was very methodical and very slow. I didn't like games like that at the time. I was a very it needs to be quick, it needs to be very quick for me to get into it. I think I got into it for a bit up until Arzuos, and then I was done. I did not want to do anymore because of how bad the controls were. I know I could have just got the Pro controller, I don't know what it's called, but it's sort of the Pro controller for the Wii. Like I said, I forgot what it's called, but you'll probably see the name and image on screen. But I didn't get that because I was a stupid kid, and also I don't think it was really necessary to buy that. Well, I didn't really play the Wii that much, but that was my experience with Try. And even though that it was a bad experience, I still consider myself to sort of be part of Third Fleet a bit. I mean, I have actually played Try It again, like, in the past year or two, but this time I actually, like, legally played it on PC, so I actually, like, dumped the game and, like, and I used my Xbox One controller to actually play it to its fullest. Now, since it's Try and not 3 Ultimate, it was very short, and I think I got to Lagiacrus. I don't know how to pronounce it, but either way, I got that far and I was like, hey, this series ain't that bad. And so when I got Monster Hunter World, I quickly got into that, and it was a lot faster than the older titles, it seemed. Now, I say older titles, I did watch some videos of the older games, like For You, MHX, I think, and even like the very first game, which I noticed was significantly different than Try, but whatever, either way, that's how I got into Monster Hunter and some of the background on it. And now, I'll talk about my thoughts on World. When I first got into World, I had a lot of issues with performance and audio, and I had to really redo the settings for my PC, as well as World itself. Now, a lot of these issues and a lot of World issues are purely based on CPU. Of course, there will be some based on GPU as well, but for the most part, the CPU is the thing you need to rely on for World in particular. I don't know whether this will be the same for Monster Hunter Rise on PC, coming next year, but if it is similar, then I wouldn't have to do much more tweaking for PC side of things, but in terms of probably the game, then yeah, I would have to do that. But yeah, those are essentially the issues that I had with Monster Hunter. Of course, I did mention the audio issues, how that would cut off occasionally, and in my opinion, I think the music is a bit low. I can't really appreciate the music to an extent. I can hear it, and it's some good music. I really like The Invading Tyrant, which is Basil Geese's theme. Basil Geese? I don't know. Either way, I just thought that the music could be like a little louder. I even had the music cranked up to the max, but I don't really want to max out my computer volume. Otherwise, the music I had on the side would get very loud and I wouldn't want to blow my ears off. But anyway, that's essentially all the issues that I had with Monster Hunter World. Now, moving on from that, how was the actual game? I thought the game was amazing, and if I was to compare it into like a Dark Souls sense, this would be Dark Souls 3 compared to Dark Souls 1, which Dark Souls 1 would be the older titles, because in fact it kind of makes sense as well, because in the first Dark Souls it's a lot more slower and things aren't as fluid in 3, but also there's a ton, and I mean a ton, of quality of life changes in 3. That in fact, World also has a lot of quality of life changes, like for instance, like fast travel. Like, of course this is a controversial feature in Monster Hunter, but in the older titles you would be constantly going around trying to find the monster, paintball the monster, and then if it leaves the area you would have to go and chase after it. I mean, you still do that in World, but in World, since you have these checkpoints, it's a lot easier to just move around rather than in the older titles where you just had base camp and there was no fast travel at all. I do really appreciate that addition, as well as some other additions like having unlimited whetstones or unlimited resource points. Like, so pickaxes. You have unlimited pickaxes, rather than in the previous games where you can only hold 5 pickaxes at a time, and it got really annoying. But luckily in GU, which I'll get to later on, the prowlers were a very good system for this, and I think in World they sort of adopted the prowlers mechanics and worked that into the core game, which I think is really good, and I think that's a really great addition. Even though, yeah, the older titles were a lot more about resource management, I think, as well as just generally a lot harder. World makes things a lot more accessible, and also the backwards roll is really good. Just putting that out there. So yeah, that's kind of how the gameplay went in World. If I was to say what areas I had struggled with, like throughout the areas within the game, so Ancient Forest to Hoarfrost Reach, I'm not counting the Guiding Lands because that's a mess, but it's a beautiful mess. But anyway, so the Ancient Forest wasn't too bad. I think the only wall I had in there was either Rathalos or Anjanath. I think initially it was Anjanath at first, but then I sort of got used to Anjanath and I sort of just know how to deal with Anjanath. With Rathalos it's a lot harder for me because it's like, it's constantly in the air. Sure, yeah, I could use flash pods and stuff like that, but I don't have access to those when I'm in the middle of a fight, and I can't think of anything else. But that's just a me problem. Then the next area, Wildspire Waste, I think the wall in there was Diablos for a while. I mean, at least it's not older titles Diablos where it's super fast, can't get a hit in most of the time, and when you can, you're about to die essentially. With the Coral Highlands, I think my wall in that one was Legiana. Really annoying fight, and honestly, even though I think I've heard people say that they've had trouble with Odogaron, I don't find Odogaron that hard. I find it perfect. I think it's like one of the perfect monsters. It perfectly encapsulates how aggressive you need to be in the game and how you need to plan your attacks accordingly. I think Odogaron is the perfect monster to just test your skills. Of course, it depends what weapon you're using. If you're using a greatsword, it's going to be a lot harder, but okay, I'll say this now, I mainly used Sword and Shield in the first place, and then I moved over to Longsword. I believe I mentioned this in the previous section, but just putting it out there, I'm now a Longsword main. Wow, weeb, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I mean, well, I really like the switch axe as well. Anyway, I'm not going to go on the rant about the weapons, but so the Rotten Vale, did I have any trouble in that area? Actually no, I didn't. Rotten Vale was probably like the middle ground. Maybe if I was to go to Iceborne, then yes, I had trouble with Tigrex. Tigrex is a beast and it is seriously hard at first, but eventually I got used to the attacks and the attack patterns, and I learned about iframes and how to abuse them essentially, and how to use Foresight Slash, which makes the fight trivial, but it's still a challenge. But I'll talk about Iceborne a bit later on. In Elder's Recess, I think the only monsters I had an issue with was Azor Rathalos and Lava Seoth. The other ones were fine for the most part. Dodogama is a punching bag, so that doesn't really matter. Oregon I thought was quite difficult at first because it kept on rolling, and it just spewed out all those bombs. But I eventually got it down and started to think, oh well, maybe it's not that bad, maybe I just have to treat it a bit like a Baroth in a way, or Radovan. Either way, I think the Brute Wyverns are probably the easiest of the monsters to kill, or hunt rather. And then with the Elder Dragons, I think Kushala Daora was probably the hardest for me initially, and then it eventually became Lunastra. Like, they are both annoying, and yeah, they're just really annoying. I didn't want to I don't like dealing with them. Maybe in the Elder titles they're better. I haven't gotten to them yet in Generations Ultimate. I don't know whether Lunastra is in Generations Ultimate, but I'm sure I'll find out later. And so that's pretty much the struggles I had with the base game. I thought a lot of the armors and the weapons looked pretty cool, although I say weapons, I would say it in quotations, because there's a lot of just slap-on weapons where you just have a weapon with a part just slapped on. It's not really inventive, it's not really good. It's just not good. So yeah, that's pretty much what I think about the base game of Monster Hunter World. I'll quickly go over my thoughts on Iceborne though. So Iceborne was a significant step up. It introduced G rank, or Master rank as World calls it, and so a lot of the troubles I had were amplified thanks to monsters like Savage Devil Joe, Seething Basil Geese, even though I think Seething was a little bit easier than the regular Basil Geese, because I knew what I was getting into with that one. And some of the monsters were just absolutely horrid to deal with, like Barioth, Nagakuga, Tigrex, which I said already. It was just a lot harder in Iceborne. I did have a lot of trouble with Velkhana as well. I think that was pretty hard. But I think when I first fought Velkhana, I thought, this is respectable, and then I actually got into the fight with Longsword, because I used Sword and Shield up until Velkhana, and then I started to use Longsword after that. It got harder. it got a lot harder. And so yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts on Monster Hunter World. I didn't want this to be like a full-on review or critique of Monster Hunter World, because that would take a lot longer. I mean, I've already spent probably like 13 minutes on this section alone, but that's pretty much what I think of World. And so now I'll move on to Monster Hunter Stories 2. Despite me playing Generations Ultimate before Stories 2, I've at least completed Stories 2 to its fullest. Rather, with Generations Ultimate, I haven't fully completed that. I'll go over that again in the Generations Ultimate section. So, how did I feel about Stories 2? I thought Stories 2 was quite an amazing spin-off, actually. Like, even though it's a turn-based RPG, which, okay, sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. It depends, again, what the concept and the themes of the game are, and how good the turn-based combat is implemented. And even though the turn-based combat in this game is pretty much rock, paper, scissors, I actually really like that format. It kind of reminds me of a game on the Nintendo DS called Dinosaur King, which is also like that, although it's not as in-depth as Stories 2 is. That being said, Stories 2 excels in other places. Like, the monster roster is actually really, really good. I haven't completed all the Elder Trials or like all the trials post game yet. However, I do think that because I've beaten the final boss, which I will not spoil because the game hasn't been out for that long, I think I can talk about the game to its fullest. So, in terms of the story, I actually thought this was really good, and it showed an amazing dynamic between riders and hunters, and how their relationship is in this universe, and how there's like different like subsections of hunters. Like, the main villains of this story are hunters, but also there's a main antagonist that is kind of with the hunters but also not. It's kind of a twist thing. It happens in like almost every anime video game thing, but even though the story may be cliched at points, I really did enjoy it. And although I do think some of the characters were quite annoying, like one of the main characters, Naviru. Either way, I didn't like that feline. I thought it was quite annoying, and every time it spoke, I was annoyed. And I even played on the Japanese language, so I thought it would be less annoying than the English one, which I have listened to, and it's still annoying. Either way, they're both annoying. But that's not me taking jabs at the voice actors. It's just the character of Naviru isn't. I personally do not like it. But I like the other characters, like Aviana. I liked her. I thought she was quite an interesting character, and the development was quite nice, as well as how she worked within the story as well. So I think the story has a lot to offer, as well as enough monsters to keep you satisfied. However, there are some monsters in the game that cannot be ridden. I felt like should have been, like Tetsukabra and Plesioth. Now, even though Zamtrios is rideable, Tetsukabra isn't, and they have like the exact same rig, basically. They share the same rig, but they have their own moves. And so that was just kind of strange. And honestly, I was disappointed to not see Great Macau. Maybe in a DLC we'll see more of those. Oh, and speaking of DLC or additional content, I really like the roadmap. It's actually set in place better than Rise. I mean, Rise barely even has a roadmap. They're probably developing the DLC for Rise at this point, whilst also doing some side things during the months on the lead up to that DLC, because, well, Rise inevitably will have a G rank expansion or Master Rank, whichever else, but this isn't about Rise. And yeah, I really like the additions that are coming to Stories 2, and like the title updates, they're pretty good, although I am very curious as to what this new final boss, or sort of final boss, will be at like the end of the game's life cycle. I find that interesting, and also I see like some very nice deviants coming back, which I really enjoyed seeing. I haven't exactly completed the Monsterpedia and the Monstepedia, but I love the roster. I think I've already said this, but I really do like it. Again, Great Macau isn't there. A bit disappointing, but hey, at least Great Jaggy is there. The best dog. The best dog. Okay, it's not a dog, but whatever. And so yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about Stories. I didn't have any issues like I did in World. It was very it was very smooth actually. I think the only issues were like loading, but that's like when you open an area for the first time, it needs some time to load everything in. Oh yeah, actually there are some other bits. I like the whole gene system, like it's like a bingo system. It's a bit complicated for me to understand at first, but I eventually got it, and so my green Nagakuga has all 9 slots maxed out. Eventually I'll have every monster, and I hope that every single monster I do, their genes will be maxed out, but that'll take like thousands of hours. I may stream it, I don't know. I think streaming it would be quite entertaining for people, maybe. I mean, I could talk, but yeah, that's just generally how Stories 2 is. If I was to give it a numerical rating, I give it a 7 out of 10. Also, you don't need to play the first stories in order to understand what's going on here. So yeah. And so, onto Generations Ultimate. So I've sort of been building up Generations Ultimate as I've gone along in the video, sort of like stating how the old games are better in a way than the new games. And even though I love the old games a bit more, I still do love the newer games. Although I haven't played Rise that much, which I'll get to after this section. But I personally think Generations Ultimate is probably the best point to be in the series, like because it's so accessible. You can just get it on the Switch. You don't have to go out of your way to get a Wii U or a PSP to get Freedom Unite or get Free U, because I think that's the only game on the Nintendo Wii U. And you don't have to go ahead and get a 3DS either if you want to play the rest of the games. Although I do recommend it I think the best game to play to introduce yourself to the series is probably either 3 Ultimate or 4 Ultimate. However, despite this, I do find Generations Ultimate to be a lot better in terms of content, but 4U and 3U have very good stories, and I think 4U is generally accepted to have sort of the best story in the series. And so Generations Ultimate comes in as a celebration to the series, a send-off to the old games, the perfect game to go back to play and kill or hunt the monsters that have been appearing since the series first started. And there's there's so many. There's like I think there's like 98 or 91 monsters in Generations Ultimate. I think that's large monsters alone. In fact, you can fight some of the older Elder Dragons like Ukanlos and Akantor, and even Amatsu. I have not gotten to Amatsu whatsoever. I am working through Village. I have gotten to rank 10 of Village, and I'm trying to get through that. I have hit so many walls in this game. This game is probably the hardest game I've actually ever played. Harder than Dark Souls, I think. Diablos is absolutely insane. It destroys me whenever I'm playing. It's so fast. I just can't keep up with it, and I can't hit it most of the time. But I'm sure eventually I'll start to understand it and kill it. In fact, Valstrax was a huge wall. It took me about a day cumulatively to beat because it was so hard. And I bet in Rise, when I get it on PC next year, it's going to be a complete joke because of the gameplay differences from the old to new. Because in the old games, it's not about movement at all. It's more about being precise, being able to hit the monster precisely, and you need to position. There's a lot more strategy in the old games, I think, compared to the newer games. The newer games are a lot more streamlined for major audiences. So yeah, I think Generations Ultimate is probably one of the better games in the series, purely because of the amount of content available. Like there's even like event content that has like Metroid crossover. There's a Metroid crossover, and I love that. Even though I don't play Heavy Bowgun, I love that. It's it's really cool to see like these Nintendo properties being like sort of integrated into, like, okay, they haven't like ported like any monsters from the other games, the Nintendo games, but it's like equipment you can get, and I find that to be really interesting. I just love it in bits. I haven't beaten any of that. I haven't. In fact, I just beat my first Hyper Monster a few days ago, and it was lovely. I loved it, even though it was Royal Bloodruff. It was really interesting to see a Hyper Monster, and in fact, I was very intrigued by the whole mechanic as well. In fact, Valstrax is also my favourite Elder Dragon. When I'm talking, it's sort of like things are just coming to my head. Like, I don't really have like a proper script. This is just meant to be a casual video. And so, yeah, Generations Ultimate I think is just probably the best way to get into the old games if you don't have a 3DS or Wii U. I think, like I said, the best game to get in the series is probably for you, and then Generations Ultimate is just there as like a hunting simulator, which I love, and I play it occasionally. And so yeah, that's essentially what I think about Generations Ultimate. Now to talk a little bit about Rise. Even though I've only played the demo of Rise, I still feel like I have a little bit of an opinion on it. Not overly, but I can say that it sort of is the same to me as World. Maybe a little bit better because it incorporates more from the older titles. The visuals remind me of the older games because it's so bright and colourful, whereas World was a lot more cinematic. It was a lot more for like movie sort of level, and so I really like that. And they also introduce monsters from the older titles as well, like Basarios and Kezu. Even though Kezu is regarded to be one of the worst monsters, I still like it. I like every monster. Okay, well, that's a lie. So there are certain monsters that I don't like, but for the most part I do. And so Rise is just kind of in the middle ground of World and the older titles. Like, I like it, kind of, maybe. I haven't played it enough to really form a good opinion on it, but hey, I just wanted to talk about Rise for a bit and how it's just similar to World. So yeah, that's basically Rise in a nutshell. It's fine, it's a lot like World, it incorporates elements from the older titles. That's just how it is for me. I haven't actually played the full game, which I will do when it comes to PC, but I have to wait until 2022. And I think I will probably make a few videos on Rise. So yeah, that's Rise. So to summarise my thoughts, I absolutely love this franchise to bits because of the sprawling life, mainly because I love the monsters. I love almost every single monster in the franchise. They're so interesting to me. It's sort of like me with animals in real life. I'm really passionate about animals. I may not be a biologist, I'm more of like the researcher type, and I care a lot about animals anyway. And the more dangerous it is, the more intrigued I am. So like blue-ringed octopus. I'm interested in that. I'm really interested in that, and I just find like the ecology and biology of these monsters just very intriguing. I love the designs of most of them. Obviously there are some that I just don't like because, well, one reason or another. But this is like the main reason why I love Monster Hunter. And of course, second to that is the gameplay. I think the gameplay is challenging enough to make it fun. I think it's a fun sort of challenging. There are some monsters that are absolutely bullshit. However, those monsters that are generally found at the end of the games, like Lunastra or some Xenojiva shit, or actually Sophie Jiva for that matter. That's some shit right there. But that's essentially how I've got into Monster Hunter and why I love it so much. It's very nice and challenging, and also just a generally beautiful game to look at as well. Of course, I do have gripes with them, as I've already said, but hey, this is just my opinion. I'll see you in the next video where I rip my hair out trying to fight an oversized pickle. Bye!